All right, everyone, welcome back to YouTube. We are going to go over a few pieces to masculinity today that people don't really know about in general. So I have heard zero men in the men's development space talk about this. I'm the only one that dives into this because the fact of the matter is people want to always build off of Carl Jung's work and say that the psychology of men is all around the king, lover, warrior, and magician. They want to base everything around that in masculinity. But on the flip side of things, they're negating real studies done in social aspects of masculinity. And many people aren't even looking at the fact of the behaviors of men within society and how that has come about, that has done in our lives, and how we as men have been groomed by a lot of these functions in masculinity that are being completely neglected by the men's development space right now. So for all you guys out there that really want to dive into this, this is definitely the episode to listen to. We're going to do another episode because there's 4 key ingredients for masculinity in social settings. The sociological studies of masculinity, and they've really only started around the 80s, I believe, and that was Raewyn Connell who started this. She was a transgender woman out of Australia, and she's essentially written the books, literally, on masculinity. One is called Masculinities, and how men are growing up in life and how we are perpetuating a cycle that was given to us by a patriarchal upbringing. And in that, because of that patriarchal upbringing, certain aspects of masculinity have traversed not only generations, but they've traversed culturally. And in that, we're developing masculinity. We're almost held to masculinity in a way that can become very oppressive. It can become very, create subordination with other sexes, obviously women. And it creates this aspect of I am better than, or controlling and dominant. So what that is referring to is hegemonic masculinity. And we're going to dive into that in another episode. But I want to really get to the 4 principles of how we develop masculinity as men in society today. And I go over this in my coaching a lot because this is what we have to really understand our foundation comes from. So this, coupled with Bandura's social learning theory, are what I really base my information around regarding the studies of men, because it's not actually been done for a long time. If you think about since the 80s, I think maybe late 70s, if we're talking about social studies being done on masculinity and its interaction with society, that's not a long time, you know? So when we really dive into this, we have to understand that for some reason, it wasn't very much studied for a long time. And that's probably because it was kind of faux pas to even do so, seeing as men were owning the, direction of how things were studied, and men didn't want to be exposed in that way. So that's one thing. But the other piece is the fact that it being such a relatively new field, when we talk about the social investigation of masculinity, psychology has been a little longer, started with kind of Freud, then Carl Jung was the larger scale kind of interpretation of men's psychology. But when we look at this, the social studies around masculinity, we have to take into consideration it's really in its infancy. But in and of its infancy, it's not too hard to see that, there is a pervasive theory amongst this that really transfers across culture to men. And so when we talk about the 4 ways, when we talk about the 4 pieces of really how we structure masculinity, it's the normative theory, you have the positivist, you have the semiotic, and you have the essentialist. And those are the 4 main ways that we develop, on top of what I believe, obviously, is Bandura's social learning theory. I think that's for all people, but in particular men. And that kind of couples more with the semiotic theory. But when we dive into these, each piece has, you may resonate with one. You may resonate with all of them. You may say that I built my masculinity in in respect to every single piece of these. And there could be little flavors of each one within how you psychologically developed masculinity, not only that you hold yourself accountable to, but you hold other people accountable to. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces that we can start with here is that, when we talk about the principles of masculinity that each man holds, we talk about how we measure other men and how we measure ourselves. This causes a lot of dysfunction in the male psychology, because the simple truth is that if we set a group of standards that we are unable to meet, right? If that's what we're going off of, then when we don't meet that, subconsciously we're judging ourselves. And if we're judging ourselves subconsciously because we haven't achieved the goals that we are supposed to be for being a man in today's world, well, what happens, guys? You can't ever be happy. You're always striving for something that will never be achieved. And in and of that never being achieved, you're always going to be struggling to find who you are and capture that man within your own psyche, let alone within the world. So that causes a lack in confidence, that causes a lack in respect and for oneself, and it causes a lack of efficacy for what you bring to society. So it's really compiling big issues when we think about the dysfunction within our measurement of masculinity and who we really are in the world. And so when men want to talk to me about this, we got to actually figure out the foundational pieces. And this is how we do that. This is what I get paid. I get paid by a lot of different men to help them figure this out, because understanding is only part of the problem. Then reframing, it becomes very different, which takes a lot of different tools. And so when we dive into this, it's really understanding our foundation. If we cannot, and you guys know this, if you've been watching the YouTube channel, you listen to me on the podcast, you cannot go anywhere without having a strong foundation and understanding your foundation. And so when we talk about all of this, we got to talk about these 4 theories, right? And so this episode, I really want to dive in at least to the first one. And it's my favorite one because I built a lot of my masculinity off of this in younger years. And that is the normative theory. Now, the normative theory is incredibly interesting to me because the fact of the matter is, with the normative theory, we're talking about how we compile information and evaluations of masculinity based on those things that are in majority of the time social media. When I grew up, it was more just TV shows, movies, magazines. Now we have the added component of social media, right? Which is a big component within the psyche of men, which is why you're seeing a deterioration, significantly drastic deterioration of masculinity within society, because you have this pervasive capturing piece of technology that is really getting men out of understanding who they truly are, and they're grabbing onto pieces that are out there that normally wouldn't have been exposed to in a lot of ways. And so I think there's a decline in masculinity, but then also to the positive side, it also lends to the fact that we're seeing some more aware men come up, maybe even some more aware boys. So it's got its pluses and minuses, right? Having that. But when we were kids, when I was a kid, I didn't have the ability to capture any information unless it was in person, or I was allowed to watch it as a TV show or a movie by my parents. And then other than that, I didn't have the ability to do it. And reading magazines wasn't like such a big thing until later in life. And even that helped shape it. But I was very selective on the magazines that I read. So it wasn't as big of a deal because it's like, oh, you got to actually put effort forward to read the article and the person's not talking, right? So you're interpreting information and you're subjective in your evaluation of the information interpretation. So, anyways, getting back to this, the normative theory, I don't know why it's called this because, or if we look at why it's called this, it's because the fact that it's this normal aspect amongst the like silver screen, the movies, the TV shows, the social media, the magazines, all of it, right? We're trying to create this normal being of man. But in respect to those things, majority of the time, the man in those positions is in a curated environment. None of it is normal. There's nothing normal about it. Majority of people actually don't even associate with this. I think there was a study that was put out that 94% of men don't even look at, 94% of men don't believe that what they see in movies or TV is actually the normal aspects of men or the normal behavior of men, right? And most of us can look at those and say, yeah, it's not. Now, we may know a few people that do those things, but majority of it isn't really normal because it's a curated environment. It's a curated program. It's a curated script. And in that, everything plays to the advantage of how they want us to perceive that man. But in reality, for all of us, that's not real. So if we try to be that guy, we're going to 100% fail every single time. But if we actually write our own story for ourselves, then we won't. But this is how we compile the information. A lot of times this is done at younger years, right? So we're watching TV shows and movies and we see the men, and then we categorically put it in our subconscious that that's what a man is. And then from then on, we start to measure ourselves against those pieces in which we collaborate with on the movie, collaborate with in the movies and TV and stuff. And so I can say this wholeheartedly, a lot of what I used to watch were very masculine movies and different styles of masculinity, but all in the same. It was things like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, John Wayne, Clint Eastwood. These guys were really big in how I was raised on what a man should be, because we used to watch those movies growing up. And it was this stoic, hardened man who did the right things because he had right morals, but he didn't necessarily go about it always the right way. So it was almost like the Punisher, right? He's a good example of this. The Punisher would be a guy that was kind of raised off of those same movies that I was, because he was a vigilante. He took it into his own hands. He took everything into his own hands, but he did it out of a way that was actually like morally correct, because it was against people who were doing really bad shit to very innocent people, right? So it's understanding that the normative theory isn't necessarily normal, but it is how we base a lot of our masculinity. And so I want to leave you guys with this, because the next episode we're going to dive into one of the other theories. But right now, I just want to leave you with the normative theory. So think about the movies that you grow up with. Think about the TV shows that you grew up with. What were the characteristics of the men? And then how have they actually been how you base your own life right now, how you base your own masculinity, how you hold other men accountable? What is that to you? And if you can do that, you can start to write down the assessment of the traits that you have, and then say, do I really align with all these? Because if I'm measuring myself against all of them and I don't meet them, well, then is that really healthy for me to measure myself? And do I hold true value for these? Because if I'm not constantly putting myself every day into a mode in which I try to accomplish being that kind of man, then I probably don't resonate with these things. But if I'm constantly trying to do that and I'm seeking the ways in which to be such a man, then I probably do resonate with them and I'm putting effort into it. So truly evaluate them, write them down, think about how they show up in your life. And if you're holding yourself accountable to things that you don't really align with, then now it's time to really write them down and look to change them, so we can really find that authenticity within ourselves. So I hope you guys enjoyed this informative episode. I will be hopping back on for another one next week where we will go over one of the other theories and actually start to tie this in to how that works. And then the other two theories will get out there as well. So then you got this 4-part series you guys can always come back to, really have the ability to hear what I'm saying, assess all the components of how you've developed your own masculinity, and then make a conscious effort to change that to being aligned with your values, your morals, your purpose, your own soul. That's what we got to do. That's how we create authenticity. All right, guys, until next week.